Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We will formally open this meeting of the Illinois Board of Review for today, October 20th, 2022. We will begin by having the board introduce itself, and then we will hear from both the counsel for the city and counsel for the appellate. Thank you. Again, I'm Kenneth Woodson, board chair.
Steve Pettit, board member.
Roger Eston, senior board member.
Beverly Penn, board member.
Ken Washington, board member.
Ed Jefferson, board counsel.
Ryan McSherry, board counsel.
Richard Wade, board administrator.
Thank you very much. Who's representing the city in this matter?
Good morning, board. Or afternoon, rather. This is Caroline Curley, C-U-R-L-E-Y, on behalf of the city. I'm also here with Divisional Deputy City Solicitor Jason Greenspan and Miss Mary Costello, Deputy City Solicitor, both just observing.
Okay. You will be principally presenting the city's case, Ms. Curley?
Correct.
Okay. And who will be representing the appellant? I think.
Good afternoon. This is Walter Zimmelong. I represent the appellant Aqueduct Fire Protection.
Okay. Mr. Zimmelong, what's the name of your firm?
Zimmelong, LLC.
Okay, Zimmelong, thank you. And I know that we have, there's one administrative matter. There was a request earlier for what it appears to be a request for a continuance. It was reviewed, that request was reviewed in executive session and it was determined not to continue this matter and to proceed. I trust that both the appellant's counsel and the city are prepared to proceed at this point.
Yeah,
We're prepared.
we're prepared to proceed, but without waiver of our objection to the hearing proceeding because of the need to, I think I'd like to hear from the board as to whether or not they're going to consider the settlement agreement that we believe bars these claims. If the board's going to consider that and weigh that evidence and then make a legal decision on that, that may alleviate the objection. If they are not going to consider the settlement agreement and release because the city objects to it, then we need to put an objection on the record as to the proceeding going forward.
I think we're going to proceed. We reference the agreement that you submitted to the degree that is relevant. We'll hear that. If it isn't relevant, we'll hear that. We're prepared to move forward. So your objection is noted for the record. Okay. So what we will do, Ms. Curley, before we start, how many witnesses will you have?
I will be presenting 2 witnesses today, and I do have just 2 initial matters.
Okay. Mrs. Zimmelong, do you plan to present any witnesses?
We do. We have Mr. Rob Reeves, my client's principal, who will testify. We plan to call Inspector Ramos as on cross-examination, and any other inspectors that the city calls. And I believe I sent my witness list over to the city last night, and with apologies, his name is escaping me as to the gentleman's name that we plan to call on cross-examination. I'm sorry, Mr. Stewart as on cross-examination and Mr. Fernandez as on cross-examination.
Okay. Well, of course, the city presents them, you will be able to cross-examine them. Okay. So let's do this.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, whether or not the city calls these witnesses, I intend to call them as on cross-examination.
Okay, understood. Okay, thank you. Just so everyone understands, of course, the administrative procedure is a bit more flexible than if you were in common pleas or superior court. However, we do insist that everyone be respectful and follow the expected decorum. And so we will proceed in that fashion. The board will, of course, at the end of this hearing, will very likely vote on the record. If there's a need to reserve our vote, we will do that and vote at a later date. But my expectation is that we will be able to hear everyone and proceed to a conclusion before we end today's hearing. We have 8 matters listed. And I'm asking both the city and Mr. Zimmelong, are they sufficiently connected that we can consolidate them for purposes of all testimony, or do we need to have 8 separate hearings?
So it is the city's position. So if I could, we do have 8 matters listed today. The city is actually withdrawing 3 of those violations So that would eliminate 3 of those, if I could go
Okay.
through the 3.
Sure.
So I have the list in front of me. I have this as number 4 on the list that
Okay.
corresponds to violation 2021-002922. That is appeal number HA 2022-003226. That was cited against Telwell Inc. The department issued that to the property owner under the incorrect code violation. Moreover, we don't think Aqueduct has standing to contest that violation, but nevertheless, we are withdrawing that violation as to the owner.
Okay.
And just to be clear, the violation was actually issued to Aqueduct. There's just repeated misrepresentation by Ms. Curley that it was issued to this owner. I'm happy to introduce a copy of the violation, Ms. Curley, that was directed to my client.
I'm getting to the second one. This specific violation number was issued both, and this specific violation number with this corresponding appeal number was issued only to the owner.
It's withdrawn.
Okay.
So noted. The next one.
Number 3 on the list, same violation number, as Mr. Zimmelong indicated, that's 2021-002922. That is under appeal number HA 2022-003225. That was issued against Aqueduct. This violation is being withdrawn by the department because it is essentially duplicative of notice of violation 2021-001653, which was properly issued against the Aqueduct and is subject to today's appeal under appeal number HA 2022-003223, which is number 1 on the list.
Okay. And so is there a third one that you also want to withdraw?
Yes, the
eliminate?
last one is number 7 on the list. That is violation number 2021-006619. Under appeal number HA 2022-003229. This was issued against an Aqueduct employee, Matthew McKenzie. It is being withdrawn because it was cited against the employee under the wrong code section.
Okay, thank you. So that will be noted as withdrawn as well. And so we have 5 remaining matters. Now, in this instance, are they sufficiently connected that we will solicit testimony on as a group, or do we need to bifurcate them and go through each one?
It is the city's understanding that we can consolidate these matters into essentially one hearing. We just do want to make it clear that the appeals that correspond to items 1, 2, 5, and 6 are all separate notices of violation, and that the appeal under number 8 on the list is an intent to suspend the contractor's license based on those violations. So just as long as that understanding is clear by the board and that the board will need to vote essentially on each matter for the record, the city has no objection to consolidating this action.
Okay, I think what we will do then is here 1, 2, 5, and 6 is one matter, and reserve a vote on 8 as a separate set of facts, because there's probably going to be, I assume there will be a presentation as to why a suspension is required for number 8. So I think that's probably a good way to group them. Mr. Zimmelong, you prepared to proceed in this fashion?
Yeah, I think there's a sufficient overlap of facts and circumstances that the underlying allegations can be tried conjunctively, and I think there's sufficient overlap with the witnesses. And I do think the chair's concept of proceeding with the notice of intent to suspend separately is a good one.
Okay. All right, then let's do this. Ms. Curley, so that we can get this out of the way, would you make your witnesses available so we can swear them all in?
Yes, my witnesses will be Inspector James Wendell Stewart and Inspector Will Fernandez. William.
Okay. Will Fernandez, okay. Are they both present? Gentlemen, would you raise your right hand so that you may be sworn? Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you give today be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Thank you very much. Okay. The way we will proceed is Ms. Curley will put on her case first, and then Mr. Zimmelong, you will have the opportunity to do that after she's concluded. And of course, each of you will have the opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses. Mrs. Zimlong, one other question for you. Will you be the principal presenter for today? You don't have no one else in your office will be presenting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Gurley, let's proceed.
The city's first witness will be Inspector Stewart.
Okay,
Good afternoon, Inspector Stewart. Can you identify your employer for me, please?
The City of Philadelphia License and Inspection, Department of License Inspection, sorry.
How long have you worked for the department?
8 years.
Okay, and what's your current position?
I am an inspector for the Audits and Investigations Unit.
How long have you, and is that commonly abbreviated AIU?
AIU, correct.
How long have you worked for AIU?
3.5 years, I believe. And then
Prior to that, what did you do for the department?
I was a building inspector for new construction and then renovation.
Okay. And can you tell me briefly, what is AIU responsible for?
AIU responsible for contractors maintaining license, maintaining their insurance. They're also responsible for site safety. So we actually do investigations to ensure that site safety is being upheld during construction. We actually do inspections to see that the proper certifications are being held as far as OSHA and safety issues when we're on site. So our primary function is to ensure that the contractors are doing what they should be doing and having their licenses in update.
Okay.
Mr. Gurley, before you proceed, Mr. Stewart, is there any way that you can reduce the background noise in your area?
I don't think so. I'm in the office. I'm sorry, but
Or just advise your colleagues that you're on camera and they need to
I will.
whisper if need be.
I will. Thanks.
Do you want a minute
Yeah.
to tell them to be quiet?
Yeah, someone's telling me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and Inspector Stewart, what specifically do you do for AIU?
You're muted, sir.
I am an inspector for primarily new construction and whatever. We do site inspections, so we are inspection driven. We go out to whatever is issued far as on our to-do list. So I'm an inspector for the AIU division.
Okay. Are you familiar with an investigation that was conducted at 2421 North Masher Street?
I am.
I am going to share my screen. Inspector, let me know when you can see this.
I see it.
Okay, this is marked as City Exhibit A. What document are we looking at?
It's a notice of violation.
Okay, and where was it issued? What property?
It was for 2421 North Masher Street.
Is that identified in the center of the
Correct.
screen? Okay. And what was the date of this notice?
It was January 7th, 2021.
Is that the date of the notice or the date of the investigation?
It was the date of the investigation.
Okay. And what's the date of this actual notice?
Date of notice is 2021. Yeah, 27. I'm sorry, January 21st, 2021.
Okay. And who was this notice issued to?
This was issued to Aqueduct Fire Protection.
Okay. Were you the inspector who investigated this property?
I was.
Can you describe for the board what happened when you inspected this property?
So I have a to-do list that is actually checked every day. This property was on my to-do list. I go out. It was a complaint, I believe, for someone working without proper licensing. I'll go to the site. I fined two gentlemen. They were supposed to be, the complaint, I believe, said it was to be working on the sprinkler systems. I found two gentlemen working on the sprinkler systems. I asked what company they work for. They had identified themselves as being Aqueduct employees. I asked for their apprentice licenses that were supposed to be carried with them. They didn't have them. Then I asked for OSHA cards. I believe they had their OSHA cards. But they gave me ID where I could identify who they were to check to see if they had their apprentice licenses, and they did not. When I checked when I go back to the office, and I found out that they did not, and the violation was issued.
Okay. I want to just clarify, did they have licenses or what was the actual violation that was issued to these two individuals?
It was, they were apprentices working with no supervisor.
So
I mean,
what
so they were-
licenses did they have?
I think they had OSHA 10 cards.
Okay, did they have did they have an apprentice license you were able to
did not.
verify?
They did not. They did not.
Okay, were they supervised by any individuals?
It was just those two individuals on the site, no one else.
There were, was there anyone with a certificate holder, fire suppression system?
There was no one else on the site, no.
Okay, so I do want to back up and say, when you identified these individuals as sprinkler system workers, what does that mean? What kind of work are they performing?
They were installing sprinkler systems. In other words, they were installing the piping, the sprinkler heads, actively installing the sprinkler system in the building.
And what is the sprinkler system? Can you explain that in like layman's terms?
A sprinkler system is an emergency fire protection that's installed.
Sir, you muted again, Mr. Stewart.
I'm sorry. Sprinkler system is the fire protection installed in usually a commercial building that helps to put out a fire in case, helps to put out a fire in case of a fire. And it's the primary protection system for in a home for or building for fire.
Okay. And I do also want to go back. You described kind of a to-do list that you have. Can you explain to the board kind of how your day, a general day with this to-do list, what is that?
Yeah, okay. So a to-do list is a group of inspections put together on my daily log. When I log in the morning, I look and see what my to-do list is and where I'm assigned to go. On my to-do list, it tells me the site, what the actual inspection is for. And that's how I plan my day. So this particular inspection was part of my to-do list for that day.
Okay. So you arrive at the office, you have a to-do list, you check it off.
Correct.
Okay. I want you to review the notice of violation on identified as Exhibit A. After you cited the violations, what did you do?
When I cite the violations, they are sent to the supervisor for review.
Okay. And are the notices of violation sent out?
Yes, but not by me specifically. It's sent to the supervisor and it's taken care of by the supervisor. So we don't actually, inspectors don't actually send out violations.
Gotcha. And were you able, when you got back to the office, how do you verify whether these individuals had licenses or not, or apprentice permits or not?
Okay, so there's a database for these the licenses. We can then put the names and it'll tell us if they have a license or not.
Okay, so looking in at these two individuals who are identified on this notice of violation as Wilson Aracho and Oscar Aracho, who had fire suppression licenses, I believe 052682 and 056340 apprentice permits. I apologize, I keep saying licenses and a permit, apprentice permits. Were you able to verify that they did in fact have apprentice permits?
Correct.
Okay. Were you able to identify any other individuals on the work site who were supervising those two individuals?
There was no one else on site.
Okay, and so were these violations, these two violations were issued against the contractor for those two violations?
Correct.
Okay,
Ms. Curley, I just want to clarify something. The two individuals who were identified here, they were the individuals that Mr. Stewart saw the day of his inspection.
correct,
They did not have a license on them as they should have, but they didn't have the physical license. He
correct,
was able to confirm later that they were licensed. They had a okay, but they were not being supervised.
correct.
And so the violation is for lack of supervision or supervision and lack of having the physical license with you. Is that both?
I would say Exhibit A and the testimony support that it is only for lack of supervision.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, moving on to, strike that. Before I move on to Exhibit B, Inspector Stewart, are you also familiar with an investigation that occurred at 808 North 19th Street?
Yes,
Did you inspect that property?
I did.
Okay, I'm gonna move down to Exhibit B. Do you recognize this document?
It's the notice of violation for 809 North 19th Street.
Oh, sorry.
The appellant objects to the testimony of Mr. Stewart regarding Exhibit B and the inspection at 808 North 19th Street.
What is the grounds for the objection?
The notice of violation clearly states that the inspection was conducted by Inspector Jose Ramos, not Mr. Stewart. Therefore,
Oh.
Mr. Stewart's knowledge of it would be hearsay.
Well, we don't know that yet, and hearsay is permitted in these hearings, so we're going to overrule that objection. Let's proceed.
Inspector Stewart, before I move on to Exhibit B, were you present at 809 North 19th Street?
I was.
Was Inspector Ramos also present with you?
Yes,
So you were you both inspecting the property?
we were.
Okay,
Now, is that 809 or 808?
I think it's,
I have 809.
The sheet says
I have
808.
808. I believe it's 808, but it's, I'll clarify with him.
Okay.
Inspector Stewart, when notices of violation are issued, do multiple inspectors sometimes inspect that property,
Yes,
especially with AIU?
yes.
Does the form that you have allow you to input all the inspectors that are there, or does it only allow you to input one?
The actual notice of violation only allows you to input one. The violations can be input by many other inspectors, but the notice of violation only allows one inspector's name.
But you did inspect the property at 808
did,
North 19th.
yes.
Okay, what kind of property is 808 North 19th? Can you describe it for the board?
I believe it was a commercial, it was commercial construction. I think it was a new construction. It was multiple, when we arrived on site, there were multiple phases of construction going on. As in our actual to-do list was for a complaint of unlicensed fire suppression workers. So that's why we went to this site.
Okay, I'm just trying to picture it in my mind. Is it it's a large scale,
Yes.
building, is what you're
Yes.
saying. And so it would span possibly more than one parcel.
It definitely did, yes.
Okay, so it could be both 808 and 809.
Well,
Maybe
that would be two sides of the street now.
Oh, that's true. Good point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now moving on to Exhibit B, do you recognize this document?
Yes, like I said, it's a notice violation for it says 808 North 19th Street, yes.
I'm gonna scroll in. What was the date of the inspection on this property?
January 8th, 2021,
Okay, and the date of the notice?
January 12th, 2021.
Okay, and can you describe for the board what happened when you inspected this property?
Okay, so we entered the site, we spoke with someone who said they were the GC. We asked if they had fire suppression workers on site. And he told us, yes. We walked over, we got one worker who identified himself. I don't believe I don't remember what exact worker there were, but he said he would get everyone that was working with him. We asked if he was alone. He said no, everyone that was working with him. And they came down to us and everyone showed their if they had their OSHA cards. So no one actually showed us a apprentice license of any kind, but they did show us their OSHA cards.
Okay. Did you identify an individual, Francis Blissick on site?
Yes,
And I think you identified him via his OSHA card.
OSHA card, correct.
Okay. Did he have a fire suppression apprentice permit or worker certificate?
He didn't have it with him. So the OSHA card is, the OSHA card was enough for as an investigator to find out if there was more or not. So he gave us his OSHA.
Okay. And was there another individual at the site, Mr. who is identified as Sean McHugh?
Yes,
And did he give you, what identification did he give you?
OSHA card as well.
Okay. And I'm just gonna move on to Exhibit D quickly. When you returned to the office, were you able to investigate both these individuals identified at the work site?
Yes, yes,
As far as the individual Francis Blissick, were you able to determine whether he had a valid fire suppression, either apprentice permit or worker certificate?
he had a expired apprentice permit.
Okay, and on looking at Exhibit D, is that the expired apprentice permit he held?
Correct, that's it.
What is the expiration date indicated on that?
It was expired June 14th, 2020.
Okay, and moving back, I believe you were the date of your inspection.
Was January 8th, 2021.
Okay, and as far as the second individual, Mr. McHugh, was there any license associated with him?
No, he had none.
Did he have an apprentice permit?
No, he had nothing.
Okay, and did he have a worker certificate? Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. And did either of these individuals, how did you determine who these individuals worked for?
They identified themselves when I go in, I ask who you're working for. They identify themselves as working for Aqueduct.
Okay. So after you'd made this determination, was the notice of violation sent out to Mr. McHugh and Aqueduct?
Yes, I believe so. Like I said, we don't actually send the violation, but yes, it was sent to the supervisor who does send the violation.
And that's what you would recognize as Exhibit B to Aqueduct and Exhibit C sent to Mr. McHugh.
Correct.
Okay. Moving on to exhibit, well, strike that before I get there. Are you familiar with the investigation done at 1721 Ridge Avenue?
I am.
Okay, did you conduct that investigation?
I did.
Okay, and I'm just gonna show you Exhibit E. Do you recognize this document?
Notice of violation to Aqueduct.
Okay, and again, what was the date of the inspection for this property?
January 25th, 2021.
Okay, and what's the date of the notice?
January 28th, 2021.
Okay, and can you describe for the board what happened when you investigated this property?
I came up to the property. I walked in. I approached the individual. I think it was Matthew. I approached and I asked him, who was he working for? He said he was working for Aqueduct. There was another individual on the site as well, and I asked who else was on site. They said it was just them two. They didn't have any kind of apprentice permits with them. They did, I believe, show me their OSHA cards. Or wait, I'm sure they had either gave me a license or an OSHA card. I'm not sure which, but I was able to come by and come back to the work and look their names up to find out if they had any kind of certifications.
Okay, and as indicated on this notice of violation, the individual who was identified as David Bernanke, Biernacki, I think I'm saying that right. What, did he have a fire suppression apprentice permit or certificate holder?
David, I think, had a certificate, but he was an apprentice and he didn't have supervision, I believe.
Okay,
Well,
so
supervision.
he had a valid apprentice permit. is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
yes.
And as far as the other individual, scrolling down to Mr. McKenzie, were you
Matthew.
able, at the time of the inspection, were you able to verify whether he had fire suppression credentials?
Well, yeah, when I got back, I found that he had nothing.
Okay, so not at the time, he didn't, when you inspected in the field, he did not present any credentials. Is that
Right,
correct?
correct.
When you went back to the office, you were not able to verify it at the time.
Yes,
Okay. You have since been able, as of yesterday, been able to verify that he did in fact have a valid apprentice permit.
correct.
Okay. Now, either of these individuals, were there any other fire suppression workers at this property when you inspected?
No, they were not. They were there alone.
Anybody identify as a certificate holder for fire suppression work?
No,
And any indication that anyone was supervising their work?
no, no, at all.
Okay, so as a result of your investigation, were these notices set upon your understanding, these notices were submitted for mailing to Aqueduct?
Yes,
I am gonna move down to. Lastly, are you familiar with the property at 609 Jefferson Street?
I am.
Okay, did you inspect that property?
I did.
Okay, I'm gonna show you, apologies, Exhibit H. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Okay, what are we looking
It
at here?
says notice of violation to Aqueduct Fire Protection System.
Okay. And this is the property 609 Jefferson Street.
It is.
Okay. And the date of the investigation, what date was that?
It was 4/15/2021.
Okay, and the date of the notice?
It's 4/16/2021.
Okay. And can you describe for the board your investigation of this property?
So this was also a property stop on my my list of investigations for the day. Went to the site. There was a worker leaving the site, loading the truck. And I asked who he worked for. He said he didn't know, but he directed me to the guy I need to talk to was in the site. So I went to the site. He was there alone. He told me he worked for Aqueduct Fire Protection. He gave me an ID, I believe. And he said that he was the only one there.
Okay, and is this the individual identified as Francis Blissick?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And were you able to identify whether Mr. Blissick had a valid, at this time in April, a valid apprentice permit?
Yes, I think he does have valid apprentice license.
Okay. Was there anyone else on the property who had a worker certificate?
He was the only one working that day.
Okay. Did he identify anyone who was supervising him?
No,
And the other individual who you initially met when you came into the property, were you ever able to identify that individual?
he had nothing. He had said nothing. He never came back into the property. So
Okay, so it disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay. Based on that, was he, Mr. Blissick and his employer, Aqueduct, were they cited with this notice of violation H?
yes,
Okay, and your understanding is it was per department policy sent out.
correct.
Can you describe for the board, so for all of these violations that involve lack of supervision of an apprentice, can you describe for the board the concerns that the department has for that kind of violation?
Well, besides it being code to actually have supervision when you do have an apprentice on site, the thinking behind it is that the person does not have the experience maybe or the necessary.
I'm gonna object to this. This is well beyond what Mr. Stewart is competent to testify as a fact witness. He's going in and giving it, let me finish. He's going in and giving his opinion on what a code means and what the legislative intent of the City of Philadelphia City Council was in passing this ordinance.
So
completely-
noted,
It's entirely
overruled.
inappropriate. It's
So
entirely inappropriate.
overruled. Let's proceed. Please answer the question.
Okay, so just what code says that anybody that's apprentice should be supervised is what we enforce. That's pretty much cut and dry. So if you're an apprentice, you're not supposed to be installing or any kind of fire systems without supervision from someone who has a license.
And as a building inspector for 4+ years and an AIU inspector for 3.5 years, do you have concerns about fire systems being worked on with by an apprentice without supervision?
Yeah, fire systems is the major component in the fire safety. So yes, it should be done by someone or supervised by someone with a license.
Okay. I do not have anything in further for Inspector Stewart. I would just ask for the admission of exhibits A, B, C, E, and H.
Okay, so moved. Mr. Zimmerlong, my apologies. Do you have any cross-examination?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Stewart. My name is Walter Zimmerlong. I represent Aqueduct Fire Protection. I have some questions about your testimony. You concluded your testimony by indicating the importance of a properly installed fire suppression system. Am I correct?
Correct.
And you were concerned that unsupervised apprentices may have, is my understanding correct that one of your concerns is that unsupervised, in your opinion, apprentices may undermine the safety of those fire suppression systems?
No, it's not
Okay.
it's not what I mean.
Tell me what you said.
Well, what I'm saying is that the code says they should be supervised. And we are enforcing the code. That's all we do.
Okay, but you did give an opinion, did you not, on
Yes.
fire suppression systems, correct?
Correct?
Right. And fire suppression systems, at the completion, no matter who works on them, they're inspected. Correct?
Yes,
Right? And in order to get a certificate of occupancy, first off, you know what a certificate of occupancy is,
Correct.
right? You were a building inspector, correct?
I do.
And in order to get a certificate of occupancy, the fire suppression system in a building needs to be inspected by your office.
Correct?
I'm
And it
gonna
needs to-
object to the relevance.
Now, I can lay the
Mr. Zimmerlong,
foundation.
wait, Mr. Zimmerlong, if there's an objection, you need to hear the objection. So no need to interfere until she puts it on the record. Okay, she didn't interfere with yours. Now, what is your objection?
The city's objection is for relevance as to the investigations that are done after the fact. We're here to discuss supervision of apprentices. Any inspections after aren't relevant to those.
Okay, so noted. In this instance, I'm going to overrule and ask Mr. Zimmerlong to proceed.
And in order to get the certificate of occupancy, if I heard you correctly before I was interrupted, the fire suppression system needs to be inspected.
Correct.
And it needs to be inspected by your office,
Yes,
and it needs to pass inspection.
correct.
Okay. And you don't have any evidence that the fire suppression system at 808 North 19th Street did not pass inspection.
Now, Mr. Zimmerlong, that is not relevant to the facts of this case.
Well-
Whether it passed or not, that's not the issue here. The issue is whether the people were properly licensed.
Well,
So that's where I'm going to ask you to narrow your questioning.
well, the
And this-
witness.
But there's no argument. I'm asking you,
I have the right to respond.
and I'm giving you instructions as to move along.
Well, I want to put on the record, and I want the record to reflect that the witness was asked and was asked to give an opinion.
So
and was
noted.
granted it. No, I have to put it on the record, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. The witness was asked for an opinion, over my objection, was permitted to give an opinion on the fire suppression system. And these lines of questioning are absolutely relevant as to that witness's opinion over the about supervision of apprentices working on fire suppression systems. But as the chair has indicated, I'll move on.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Stewart, you also stated that the code requires apprentices to be supervised, correct?
Correct.
And by the code, you mean Chapter 9-205 or 2500, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And part of your job duties include inspecting construction sites where contractors are working, and it's not just fire suppression systems, correct?
Correct.
So you inspect job sites and you encounter electricians
I do.
and you encounter plumbers?
Correct.
Okay. And you're familiar with the plumbing code?
Yes.
Okay. And if there is a plumber working on a job site, you do not require the licensed plumber to be on that job site.
As far as AIU is concerned, or if I was a building inspector? Because
As
a
far as
building.
AIU could.
Okay, as far as AIU concerned, no, we don't, we have no, we don't come in to find out if a plumbing code is especially, they have a very broad code for plumbing. So no, we don't come in to look for a plumber's supervisor, correct?
Okay. And you have a supervisor,
Correct.
and he does not appear on site at every inspection you do.
Objection.
Sustained. Please move on, Mrs. Malone.
What's the objection?
Relevance.
I'll withdraw the question. I think it's obvious.
Thank you. If you have any additional witnesses to Ms. Curley,
Excuse me, I'm not done my cross-examination.
oh, please proceed.
Now, I want to talk to you about the citation. I want to talk to you about more about the code citation that you primarily cited Aqueduct for. If I understand correctly, you issued 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 code citations to my client, correct?
I believe so.
And you had a 6th code citation issued to Mr. Matthew McKenzie, correct?
Correct.
And you issued that in January of 2021?
I believe so. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I believe so.
Do you agree with me, Mr. Stewart, that it's important that you provide accurate information to your supervisor to give issue violations?
It is.
Objection.
I'm going to overrule that objection. I want to see what Mrs. Malone, where we headed here.
Now, and were you are aware that the violation at 1721 Ridge Avenue was withdrawn today, correct?
Objection. That's a mischaracterization of the department's position.
Mrs. Malone, I'm not clear where we're headed here.
Mr. Stewart, you issued a violation CF 2021-006619, because Matthew McKenzie was working at 1721 Ridge Avenue, in your opinion, without an apprentice license.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And yesterday you found out that Mr. McKenzie did in fact have an apprentice license, didn't you?
Yes.
Right. And you found out about that because I provided those documents to your attorney, didn't you?
Yes.
And from January 2021 into the present, you did nothing to verify whether Mr. McKenzie had an apprentice license.
Okay. You want me to tell you why, or when I go out to an investigation?
I didn't ask you to tell me why. I asked you, you didn't do anything
gonna
else
object
to
at this point.
verify that.
This is argumentative.
Yeah, Mrs. Malone, if there's this information that you have presented, and that's fine. I guess I just don't understand clearly what the question is. Is there some action that you're suggesting he should have taken that he didn't take?
Well, I would think, Mr. Chair,
I'm just
That is-
objecting at this point.
I
because
would think,
council's
Mr.
testifying.
Chair, that when there is,
Okay.
when the city of Philadelphia is
Object-
attempting to revoke a
Objecting
license
again, this is
and put
all
a big
testimony
company
from
out
the
of,
attorney.
I thought we weren't allowed to interrupt each other.
Okay. So understood. And again, we will everyone will have an opportunity to present their case. Mr. Zimmerlong, I'd asked for an explanation. Okay, and your position here is that you believe that the inspector should have taken some further action. Is that the case?
That is the case, and the inspector had a legal obligation.
Okay, well then that's argument you're going to make at some point during your presentation. Okay, so I just want to understand.
Mr. Stewart, you were placed under oath today?
That was,
You understand the gravity of that oath?
I do.
Do you understand that oath has the same force and effect as if it were given before a judge or a jury?
Objection. This is beyond
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Mr. Zimmerlong, is there some accusation of untruth that's being told? He responded to your question.
Sure. I think that there's an accusation of untruth. There was
Okay,
a
but then you can
violation.
present that. Well, what I'd like you to do
I
is
am
present
trying
that.
to present.
Listen
it.
to me. You can present that information when you do your presentation. Okay, if that's
I'm
part of your
trying to
argument.
do my presentation, and this witness.
You
I
will
was
cross him
submitted-
based on his testimony. And if you have any additional
Excuse
questions,
me,
please
sir.
do it.
You will
Excuse
listen
me.
to me.
No, you will listen to me. You will do your cross based on his testimony. And if in fact you have additional information to present when you present, do that. But I'm
Okay.
asking you to proceed
Okay,
and to be
sir.
very narrow in your questioning based on his testimony.
I just want to be clear, Mr. Chair. I'm going to recall then Mr. Stewart in my
You
case.
can do
in chief.
that if you choose
Okay.
to do that.
Okay,
okay.
I understand. I thought that the
Please proceed, sir, and not without argument so we can get through this.
Okay, so just so I'm clear for the record, you're allowing me to recall Mr. Stewart
Listen,
as on cross-examination.
Mrs. Zimmerlong, I said to you that if, and I've said to everyone, we will proceed as normally we would. If there's a need for you to bring back a witness or request to bring back a witness, you can. But even then, if I believe that your questioning is inappropriate, I will intervene. Okay? So I'm asking you to proceed. If you have any further questions, please ask them. If you don't, we'll go on to additional witnesses.
And just,
And Mr. Stewart,
sorry, just to be clear, the city is not going to object if Mr. Zimmerlong wants to proceed as if on cross now, but the city is going to object to irrelevant questions just as it would if he presented him as if on cross.
okay. Mr. Stewart, how's the property get on your to-do list?
I don't know.
Does anyone tell you to put stuff on your to-do list?
We don't put, I'm not allowed to choose my stops or anything. It's given to me on a daily basis. And that is how I get them.
Who gives it to you?
It's, I believe it's put together by my supervisor.
And who's that?
My current supervisor is Joseph Mahaffey.
And who was your supervisor in January 2021?
He was still the supervisor, yes, I'm sorry. Joseph Mahaffey.
All right, so I want to talk to you about your time with AIU. You were working with AIU previous to January 2021,
Yes,
and you were inspecting construction sites,
yes,
and you were inspecting sprinkler fitter contracting firms like Aqueduct.
we did, well, Aqueduct was a company that came far as a service request, which we do as well. So if it was a service request or any kind of inspection, that's how we get to go to these sites. It's either referral from a district office, or it was what we call service requests, or it's just a scheduled inspection.
All right, I want to know, are you aware of any encounters that you had with employees of Aqueduct before January 2021?
I'm just going to object to relevance.
I'm not sure.
So noted, overruled, please proceed.
Mr. Stewart, you can answer the question.
Oh, I'm not sure if I had an encounter with before 2021.
Oh, okay. Do you recall prior to January 2021, can you testify as to any specific citations to any sprinkler contractor that you issued where a licensed apprentice was working on a project, but there was not a certificate holder on site supervising the apprentice?
Just again, going to object to relevance to this question as to the matters before the board today.
The same. Thank you.
Can I respond to the objection?
The objection has been made and I sustained it. So please move on.
Well, I have a right to put on the record what my response is to an objection. I have the
Okay,
right to
please.
preserve it.
Okay, preserve it. Yes, please do that.
Yeah, the defense of equitable estoppel has been raised. it goes to a fundamental defense that the defendant has in this case, which is the city unilaterally in January 2021 changed its interpretation of the code.
Okay, but you can say that you can present that information or evidence if you have it, if you believe that's going to be relevant.
Well, I'm trying to present the evidence, but I'm apparently not being allowed to.
Because the approach is not in that direction. So I'd ask you to move on. I've made my ruling in this matter, and we're going to move on.
You testified that I believe it was Mr. Blissack had an expired license when you visited 808 North 19th Street, correct?
Yes,
Isn't it true that that license was only expired for a few days?
after the inspection, I believe it was renewed, but
Right.
it was during the inspection, it was expired, correct?
Okay, and it was renewed a few days later?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you ever check to see if it was, when you inspected the process, the license was in the process of being renewed?
Our inspections are for the time that we were there. We don't go back for any kind of checks. It's at the time of inspection. That is the violation. At the time of the inspection is why you will get the violation.
That's all I have, subject to recalling Mr. Stewart in my
Okay.
case in chief.
Thank you. Ms. Curley, you have any additional witnesses?
Chair, I just want to clarify as to the bifurcation of these matters because these concern the violation notices. My next witness would be Director Fernandez. His testimony both pertains to this matter and to the eventual suspension. I think it does, like the timeline does lead into it. I just want to make sure I understand if you want me to cut off at some point with Mr. Fernandez or just keep going.
I'd rather you cut off and then come back to this issue of the license suspension.
Okay, just wanted to
Okay.
make sure I understood.
Okay.
So then my next witness will be Inspector Fernandez.
Okay.
Director, sorry. And you're muted. Great.
Good afternoon.
And Director Fernandez, can you identify your employer, please?
Yes, I work for the Department of Licenses and Inspections.
And what's your position there?
I'm the Director of the Audits and Investigations Unit.
Okay, and describe for the board your role as the Director of AIU.
Well, I run AIU, and AIU is responsible for contractor and trade licensee compliance with the applicable license requirements, which are set forth in Title IX of the code.
Okay, and you heard the testimony that's been presented thus far today.
I have, yes.
Are you familiar with the investigations we've been discussing at the 4 properties we've identified?
I am.
Can you just briefly explain to the board how you're familiar with those investigations?
Well, I was the Director of Audits and Investigations at the time that they were issued. I was involved with a license investigation that was started after the initial 3 violation notices went out. I made the decision to begin that license investigation. And then after that point, I was more closely involved in the license investigation that would culminate in the license suspension.
Okay. And so just focusing on these 4 properties that we've discussed today, did you review the results of these investigations for each of the 4 properties?
I did, yes.
Okay. And do you agree today that the actions that were observed by your inspectors constitute violations of the Philadelphia Code?
I do.
Okay, so I'm going to begin with the violations that pertain to apprentices who were not supervised by fire suppression certificate holders. Can you explain the code violation to the board that was issued?
Are you referencing a specific site, or do you want me to describe the requirements around apprentices and certificate holders with respect to fire suppression work in general?
I'll strike that. I'll strike my question and I will ask, what are the requirements for apprentice holders in general who work in the city of Philadelphia?
Sure. Well, there's a license called a fire suppression contractor license. I think the easiest way to kind of imagine that is that's the company license. It allows a company to obtain fire suppression permits to install fire sprinkler systems. That's the requirements for fire suppression contractor companies are in 91005. There's another code section, 92500, which lays out worker requirements for the workers that are actually conducting the work to install the fire suppression systems. That section is 92500, and the requirements themselves are very straightforward. There needs to be a fire suppression certificate holder, which is often referred to as a journeyman, on-site providing supervision, and then anyone who is working on the system has to be either a certificate holder, aka journeyman, or a registered and permitted by the department apprentice supervised by a certificate holder.
Okay. And just to clarify, the fire contractor license you referenced under 91005, that's the license Aqueduct holds.
Correct.
Okay, and the individual, either journeyman or apprentice permits, those are held by the employees.
Yes, those are held by the employees.
Okay. And how do you, as the director of AIU, apply the term supervision of apprentice permits? What does that mean?
The supervision requires on-site supervision. That's clear from the text of the code. And I don't think there's anyone in the department that would interpret it differently.
Okay. To your knowledge, has the department ever applied a different definition of supervision to fire suppression apprentice permit holders?
No.
Okay. Is there any policy, written regulation, bulletin, anything of that sort that identifies a different definition of supervision?
No.
Okay. And as the director of AIU, why is supervision of fire suppression apprentices important?
Well, the primary reason that I would cite to is the code requires it, and we are duty bound to enforce the code. In reality, becoming a certificate holder or a journeyman requires passing an exam and graduating from a 4-year-long apprentice program. And so we know that certificate holders or journeymen are seasoned, experienced, knowledgeable with respect to fire safety systems, and well, sprinkler systems, I should say, to be more specific.
Okay. And there has been some mention of the department doing final inspections of fire suppression systems. Are you aware of that?
Yes, when a new construction permit is issued, there's a series of inspections that must be passed. Those culminate in the final inspection or the walkthrough inspection, during which the building inspector performs a final walkthrough on the completed building. And then prior to issuing the certificate of occupancy, assuming there are no issues with the final walkthrough, collect some certifications with respect to certain systems in the property. So specifically for sprinkler systems, there is a certification that is collected before the certificate of occupancy can be issued. It can be performed by the company that installed the sprinkler system. And to my knowledge, it typically is in the vast majority of situations. The L&I inspector that performs the final inspection walkthrough, it goes without saying that in the vast majority of circumstances, I can't speak for every single inspector in the department, but in the vast majority of circumstances, that inspector won't have, they don't have the level of expertise that a certificate holder does.
Okay. And when they're doing this final walkthrough, is that sufficient in your position as director of AIU to replace any sort of requirement that apprentices are supervised?
Absolutely not. The code explicitly says that they must be supervised. And so that is, of course, our position.
Okay. I have nothing further for Mr. Fernandez at this time as it pertains to the first 4 appeals. I do have questions for him that obviously pertain to the last.
Okay, thank you. Any cross, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yeah, Mr. Fernandez, you're a lawyer, right?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Objection?
Now, Mr. Fernandez,
Overruled.
Mr. Fernandez, did I hear testimony correctly that you believe it's clear from the code that supervision take place by a certificate holder on site?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that the section of the code you're talking about is section 9205 subpart 4?
I can't say that From memory,
Okay,
that's the exact section, but that sounds approximately right.
Well, let's make sure, I'd rather have clarity over agreement. So let's make sure we're right here. I've displayed for you, sir, a section of the Philadelphia Code. And if you see right here, it's section 9-205, and then there's some subparts. And this part that I've highlighted right here is subpart 4. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you would agree with me, that is the section of the Philadelphia Code that you're referring to when you say that apprentices need to be supervised on site by certificate holders.
Yeah, from memory, there may be some other sections of 92500 or maybe even 91005 that bear some relevance, but I believe that is the most on point language in 92500.
Okay, you would agree with me, the words on site don't appear in this subpart.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you say on-site supervision is clear from the text, that's your opinion rather than it actually, the words on-site actually appearing anywhere in the code.
It's my interpretation. I agree that the words don't appear in the text.
It does, and when you say in the text, it doesn't appear in section 9-25054, correct?
Correct.
And it doesn't appear anywhere else in the Philadelphia Code.
That's correct.
Nothing further for Mr. Fernandez at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Curley, any additional witnesses?
We have nothing else.
Okay, well, let us do this then. Mrs. Zimmerman, you prepared then to proceed on the first 4 matters, and then we'll all come back to number 8 at the end.
Yes. I'm
Okay,
prepared
let's
to
proceed.
proceed.
Okay, thank you.
I call Mr. Robert Reeves.
Mr. Robert Reeves. Okay, Mr. Reeves, you raise your right hand so you may be sworn. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give today be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you. You can place your hand down. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Reeves. What's your relationship to Aqueduct?
I'm a managing partner,
Okay. How long have you been a managing partner?
8 years,
How long has Aqueduct been in business approximately?
8 years,
How long has it been performing work in the city of Philadelphia?
8 years.
Are you familiar, there's been some discussions about the Philadelphia code regarding licensing of folks that work on fire suppression systems in the city of Philadelphia. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes, I did.
Are you familiar with that code?
I am.
Okay. Are you familiar with the different types of licenses that have been discussed so far today?
I am aware.
Okay. And there was one license that was identified as a certificate holder license.
Correct.
Right. And do you hold a certificate holder license?
I do.
How long have you held one?
Probably since they were instituted.
Okay. If I told you they were instituted in approximately 2001, would that be how long you've had that certificate holder license?
It had went expired in maybe the 90s, and then it was just renewed after that.
Okay. And as long as it's been required under the Philadelphia Code, your testimony is you've had one.
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else at Aqueduct have certificate licenses?
Yes.
Okay. Who else?
Devin Schneid.
Okay. And who's Devin Schneid?
He's also my partner.
Okay. How long has Mr. Schneid had a certificate license?
About 8 years.
8 years?
Yeah, Mrs. Zummalong, would you mind having him spell that last name, please? I just want to make sure that it's picked up properly.
SCHNEIDT.
SCHNEIDT.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Mr. Reeves, then there was testimony about the type of license that a sprinkler firm needs to have in order to be able to pull permits in the city of Philadelphia. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes,
Are you familiar with that license?
I am.
Does Aqueduct maintain one of those licenses?
We do.
Okay. And how long has Aqueduct had that license?
8 years.
Okay. And has Aqueduct maintained the license that has been able to allow it to pull permits in the city of Philadelphia continuously for 8 years?
We have.
Okay. And have you maintained your certificate holder license in good standing for as long as you've had it?
I have.
Never been suspended?
Nope.
And as far as you know, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schneitz has never been suspended either?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Is there anyone else in your firm that has a certificate holder license?
They'll come and go as employees will.
Okay. I want to focus in on January 2021. Okay. First, let me ask you this. I'm going to focus on the time period between January 2021 and April 2021, correct? Is that okay? Okay. And you saw a number of, during the city's presentation, you saw a number of violations that were issued against your firm, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that all of those violations, they may have contained other things, but each of those violations contained an allegation that there was a apprentice working unsupervised on a project?
Correct.
Okay. Prior to January 2021, was Aqueduct performing work with apprentices in the city of Philadelphia?
Yes.
Okay. And was it prior to January 2021, did it have apprentices performing work in the city of Philadelphia on projects that were visited by the Department of License and Inspection?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
Prior to that.
Did you ever receive a citation in the multiple years that Aqueduct was performing work in the city of Philadelphia prior to January 2021? Did it ever receive a citation from the city of Philadelphia for having a licensed apprentice working on a project without a certificate holder also being on site?
No.
And since June of 2021, has it received any citations that has had apprentices working on projects without a certificate holder being on site?
I'm gonna object.
We have not.
What is the objection?
Any actions after the dates we're speaking about aren't relevant to the proceedings of these 4 appeals we're discussing.
It's relevant to our defenses.
Okay, so noted. I'll overrule the objection. Let's proceed. And so the answer to that question is what, Mr. Reeves?
None.
None.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Reeves, do you supervise your apprentices?
Ad nauseum. It feels like at times.
Okay. Can you explain, and I want to, let's put it this way. Did you personally supervise your apprentices working on projects in the city of Philadelphia between January 2021 and April 2021?
Absolutely.
Okay. Did the first violation we talked about, I believe it was a violation that was issued for a project at 2421 North Masher Street. Did you hear that testimony from Mr. Stewart?
Yes, from the Orocho brothers.
And you know the Orocho brothers?
Yes.
Are they still employed by you?
They are not.
Okay, but they were employed by you in January 2021.
Correct.
And you're familiar with that Masher Street project?
I am.
Did you supervise the Orocho brothers at the Masher Street project?
I did.
Did Devin supervise?
He
them?
did as well.
Okay. Explain to the board how you supervise the Orocho brothers at the Masher Street project.
We'll stop by the project 2 or 3 times a week. We also have pre-task analysis before the project even gets started to get the groundwork laid for the actual project. We have rough-in checklists throughout the course of the project. We also do toolbox talks on site with the employees as far as from a safety standpoint, all the way up to final commissioning when we're actually doing the inspection and testing. And that also goes with our on-the-job training that we apply towards our National Labor Relations Board apprenticeship program.
Anything else?
A lot of times we FaceTime. It actually became really popular during COVID, but we had actually been using that prior to that. If there was ever a question that arose we would actually pop them up on FaceTime and go over what they were doing at the exact time they were actually doing it.
Okay. So if I heard your testimony correctly, among other things, you visit the project.
100%.
You check and you personally check in with the folks that are working out there for you.
Absolutely.
And you did that at Master Street.
Without a doubt.
Okay. And all the processes and procedures that you just described regarding supervision of employees, you did all those at Master Street.
Correct.
Okay. And when your employees have questions, are they instructed to contact you?
100%.
Okay. And do they do that?
Every day, all day.
Right. And it sounds like they use a FaceTime to do that.
Most of the time, yeah, it's the most convenient way to do it.
Now, the other project that we heard testimony about today was 808 North 19th Street.
That
You
would be,
familiar with that?
yes, that would be considerably bigger than the Master Street.
Okay. You're familiar with that?
Absolutely.
And did you supervise your employees on that project?
Of course.
And did your supervision include all the practices that you just testified to?
Absolutely. Our SOPs are rock solid.
Visiting the project,
Multiple times a week,
FaceTiming employees,
all the time,
toolbox meetings,
all the time.
open lines of communication,
Yep,
and that was done at 808 North 19th Street.
correct.
Now, at 808 North 19th Street, did you ever have an inspection? Were you ever physically present for an inspection by the Department of License and Inspection?
I never actually ran into them while they were there.
Okay. How about at Master Street?
Um,
Yes.
808, I believe Devin, who was actually sitting across, but Devin and I had ran into them at 808 North 19th, but not at Masher.
Okay. So at 808 North 19th Street, there were occasions where representatives of the Department of License and Inspection visited the project, correct?
Correct.
And you and Mr. Schneid were there.
One or the other, yes.
Okay. And do you remember that? Was it Mr. Stewart that you encountered?
And Mr. Ramos.
And Mr. Ramos. Mr. Stewart and Mr. Ramos.
I just want to remind one witness at a time.
One just because we are on Zoom, when someone else speaks, it's just picked up.
I'll
And-
apologize.
Okay, and a court reporter has to record everything that we do. So please, thank you.
And did you explain to Mr. Ramos and Mr. Stewart who you were?
Mr. Schneid did.
Now, are you familiar with a project located at 1721 Ridge Avenue?
I am.
And did you supervise your employees at 1721 Ridge Avenue?
Of course.
And did the supervision include the type of activities that you previously testified to?
Every project.
Okay. And are you familiar with the project located at, before I move on, at 1721 Ridge, did you personally ever encounter any representatives of the Department of License and Inspection?
I did not.
Okay. 609 Jefferson Street. You familiar with that project?
I am.
Okay. And did you supervise your employees on that project?
Of course.
And would that include Mr. Blissack?
It would, Frank, yes.
Okay. And would your supervision include the type of activities that you already testified to?
Of course, every project.
And you did all of those.
Correct. A lot of times we do it also for our insurance company as well, for documentation to provide for them to actually, try to keep our rates somewhat reasonable.
Now, bear with me here. One second while I just orient myself with this specific violation. Now, Mr. Reeves, are you familiar with litigation that you and others brought against the City of Philadelphia Department of License and Inspection?
So I'm gonna object.
Uh,
as
uh,
documents to this
what-
matter.
What is the basis for the objection?
Any other litigation is wholly irrelevant to the appeals that are pending before the board today.
Okay. Mrs. Zummalong, is the litigation that you've raised is it specific to these violations?
No, the litigation that we raised is related to the subject matter of these violations, and I could move on. I mean, I'm
Yeah, I
trying to
would
let.
prefer if they aren't
Well-
specific to these violations, then I have to sustain the objection.
If you could let me finish, this is what I'm attempting to do is lay the foundation for the witness to testify about the settlement agreement.
Well, that's not relevant to these specific violations if the settlement agreement doesn't reference them. So that's why we're
I
at
don't-
crossroads on that. So I'd ask you to move along then.
Mr. Reeves, I've shared with you a document, and we're going to mark this as plaintiff's exhibit. I'm sorry.
I'm objecting to the admission of this document or any reference thereof.
Um,
This is exactly what the board just said is irrelevant.
Mrs. Zummalong, I'm not, which document is this and what is it that you're showing on your screen?
This is the settlement agreement in which the city gave a release to.
This is irrelevant. I'm requesting that it be removed from.
Okay,
this
well,
meeting.
wait a minute, Mr. Zummalong, before you do that, before I rule on this, does this settlement agreement specifically relate to these issues
Yes.
and this notices of
Yes.
violation?
No, it
Yeah.
does not. That is
Now, I'm
wildly
asking
inaccurate.
Mr. Zummalong to respond. Mr. Zummalong, what
Yes,
is your
it does.
response to that?
Yes, it does. And here, and-
Well, let's immediately go to that section. Show me where it's referencing
okay.
those violations.
Okay, so in order to understand that, you first need to look at paragraph 2 of the settlement agreement.
He
How-
cannot do it.
Can I?
Cannot point to
Wait
these
a minute,
appeals,
wait a
and
minute,
this
Ms.
is
Curley.
wildly inappropriate.
Ms. Curley, I'm asking the question here, and Mr. Zummalong, I'm going to entertain this discussion on paragraph 2 just for a moment. I want you to specifically show me where there's direct relationship between that paragraph and these violations.
Okay, and I just ask that I not be interrupted.
I may
okay?
interrupt you if what you're
No,
giving
no,
me is
by
not
Miss,
relevant.
by Miss Curley.
She will have asked everyone to wait until the other person has responded. I will direct traffic here.
Okay.
And so I'm asking
Now-
both of you and Ms. Curley.
Mr. Woodson, this is why it applies. Paragraph 2 talks about the underlying litigation, which involved the City of Philadelphia Department of License and Inspection and Ralph DePietro, the director's interpretation of section 9-2500, which is the precise sections that we're talking about today. Here, there is a mutual release. That mutual release states, upon execution of this agreement, the parties hereby release and discharge each other from any and all claims raised or which could have been raised by either party against each other in this action, and by that action they mean the actual litigation, or related to the subject matter thereof. The subject these violations are related to the subject matter of that underlying litigation. Mr. Reeves, if he's permitted, will testify, and I offer proof on this, that when he signed this agreement, he understood that by giving up his rights against the city to pursue on a very serious constitutional violation, evidence of wrongdoing by Mr. DePietro, Mr. Fernandez was uncovered in discovery in that case. He was giving up a considerable damage claim, based upon the belief that these violations were being terminated and dismissed. This agreement was signed in June 2022. The City of Philadelphia, it was signed by the city solicitor herself. The City of Philadelphia should have known about these violations. And I provided the board with the case law underlining my theory. It's very clear under Pennsylvania law that when the board interprets the language of that release, it unequivocally released these as well.
Okay, Mrs. Zummalong, and I guess are you suggesting that any violations that would have occurred prior to this June notice, this agreement, were incorporated into this
That's right.
document?
Essentially,
That's
correct.
your argument. Okay,
Essentially.
and before we move forward, Ms. Curley, I'm going to digress just a moment. Your position is that is not the case.
I mean, board, I want to clarify some very serious things. First of all, the underlying common police court action that this settlement resolved raised zero constitutional questions. It was a declaratory action about the department's use of a form. That is the sole issue that was presented, and all of the claims related to that form. That was the underlying matter. It did not address these appeals. It would not ever have addressed these appeals. And moreover, it is entirely irrelevant to this matter. And even if it was relevant, it's very clear from this agreement that the department specifically reserved the right to pursue any enforcement action that was pending, would be pending, any future interpretations, to ensure that the only thing the settlement agreement addressed was the use of Form 671 that concerned that agreement. That is the only purpose of that settlement agreement.
May I respond to that?
I needed to hear her side. I've gotten it. I think I know what I'm going to do. We're not going to use this as a relevant document, Mr. Zumwalong.
Okay, I just want to put on the record, nowhere in this agreement does it say that it does not apply to pending enforcement actions. That's now the third misrepresentation by Ms. Curley.
Okay, but we're not going to relitigate the agreement that you executed with the city. So take that off the screen and we proceed, please.
I just
So
want to
that-
make sure that I'm referencing the correct, since Mr. Zumwalong seems to think I'm reading from something that doesn't exist. I'm reading from paragraph 7, and that is the third paragraph.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about pending enforcement
Thank you.
action.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you agree, as long as she agrees that she misrepresented that.
I do not agree with that, just so the record is clear.
Okay,
Okay.
let's
And
move
then-
on. Let's
And
move
so,
on.
so as I'm clear, it is the ruling of the board at large that the settlement agreement is not being admitted into evidence.
Yes.
Well, I renew my objection to this proceeding going
So
forward,
noted.
because the only way we can get that ruling is through a declaratory judgment. And I just want to add our due process rights are
Okay,
being violated.
So noted. Please move on. You have any additional witnesses? If not, I'll ask Ms. Curley to cross-examine.
No, I'm not done with I'm not done with the witness.
That's what I asked. Do you have any other questions?
Allow me to recalibrate because I was interrupted. Now, there was some discussion about Mr. Bernanke. You familiar with him?
Dave, yes.
I'm sorry. It was Frank Blizzak. You're familiar with Frank Blizzak?
Yes.
And one of the violations you received for Mr. Blizzak was at the 808 North 19th Street project?
Correct.
Okay. And that North 19th Street project, he had an expired apprentice license when Mr. Stewart inspected that project. Do you agree with that?
That is correct.
Okay. What was that? Was that process was that license in the process of being renewed?
It was.
Okay. And do you know how long after the department finally got it back to him?
I'm going to say a few days after the violation.
Right. And this was all during COVID too, correct? 2021?
Yeah, it was had to be right there. Yeah.
And the Department of License and Inspection, there was nobody even in the office, right?
Objection.
I was all.
I'm
Thank
not
you.
sure.
I don't have anything further for Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. Ms. Curley, you have any cross?
Just a few questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Reeves.
Good afternoon.
You testified, so you are a current fire suppression certificate holder, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
We'll do shorthand journeyman. Is that okay?
Depends on
just do
what you mean by-
certificate holder. Does that
It
work?
depends on what you mean by certificate holder, because there's actually a company certificate holder, which I am one, which has to be nice at level. And then you also have a worker certificate holder, which is a separate entity.
And are
from
you,
the
do you
original-
hold both licenses or you just hold the contractor company license?
I hold both of them.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. So as far as the worker certificate, permit, is it yourself and Mr.
Schneid.
David Schneid? Thank you. Are those the two individuals for your company who hold that worker certificate?
We have others that come and go as employees do.
Okay, approximately how many?
At any one time,
Let's say January 2021.
4.
4. And how many employees total did Aqueduct, or strike that, how many fire suppression apprentice permit holders did Aqueduct have as employees in January 2021?
I'm not sure, but I could find out.
Okay, fair enough. Do you know how many permits Aqueduct pulls from the city of Philadelphia every year? Estimate.
A lot. 200, say.
200, hundreds, is that fair?
Hundreds.
Okay. And there are 4 worker certificate holders who oversee those hundreds of permits.
Some may last for a day. Some may last for a couple hours as well.
Okay. And your testimony was that you or Mr. Schneid will supervise the apprentices stopping by the projects 2 to 3 times a week.
Surely.
Okay, but not daily, you'd agree?
Depends on the project. Sometimes daily,
But sometimes not.
but sometimes not.
Okay. And so you'd agree that on January 21st, 2021, when the department came to 2421 Masher, the two Arocho, Mr. Wilson Arocho and Oscar Arocho, there was no one supervising them at the time the department inspected.
At the time, the department inspected, correct.
Okay. And the same when the department inspected 808 North 19th Street, no one was there supervising them on site when the department inspected.
When they inspected, correct.
Okay. And the same with 1721 Ridge Avenue, no one was there when the department inspected.
Correct.
And the same with 609 Jefferson Street, no one was there when the department inspected.
Correct. But I believe 808 North 19th Street, they had actually, the audit department had come back and there actually was someone there.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that date that occurred?
I don't remember the date, no.
Okay. So it could have been the 8th, it could have been another day.
Correct, yes. It
Okay.
would have been another day, sure.
It was not the 8th, it was another day.
I'm sure it was another day,
Okay.
yes.
And so someone was on site there on that other day, whenever it was.
On several projects, yes.
Okay. And
Meaning that they had actually run into us. It's not like they never saw anyone there, you know what I mean?
I understand. And was I going to ask for its indulgence? Oh, as to Mr. Blissick, you testified that his license was in the process of being renewed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but that license had actually expired in June 14th of 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
So at that point, at the time the department investigated in January 8th of 2021, that was over 6 months that license or that apprentice permit had not been renewed.
Correct. And there's a very good chance he could have been working outside of the city as well. Because we do work in all of New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and the city of Philadelphia, where the city of Philadelphia is the only one that actually requires the permit. So had he been working in Lower Marion the entire time, yeah, there may have been.
But you'd agree on January 8th, 2021, he was working in the city of Philadelphia.
Agreed, yes.
Okay. And as to Mr. McHugh, Sean McHugh, you would agree he did not hold a valid apprentice permit license on January 8th, 2021.
He did not.
Okay. I have nothing further for Mr. Reeves. Thank you so much.
Okay, Thank you very much. Any additional witnesses, Mr. Zummalon?
Yeah, I call Inspector Stewart.
Okay. Is Inspector Stewart still available?
There we go.
Okay,
I am. I'm here.
okay. Please proceed.
Yeah, Inspector Stewart, you performed inspections of fire sprinkler firms prior to January of 2021, correct?
AIU?
At AIU.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And can you testify as to any specific instances sitting here today where you issued a citation to a fire sprinkler firm prior to January 2021 for having licensed apprentices being on a project without a certificate holder being physically present?
Just gonna object to the relevance as to these
So-
four
so-
here.
So noted. I'll overrule that, Mr. Stewart.
No, I'm not sure if I ever did that or not, no.
Okay. And is the reason you're not sure you ever did that or not because the department's practices changed?
I can't speak on if the department's practices changed. What I'm saying is I don't remember if I'd done it prior to January.
And at some point, you received instruction from Mr. Fernandez that the department, your department, was going to interpret section 9-2500 to require certificate holders to be physically present along with apprentices on projects, correct?
Correct.
And that was in or about January 2021.
I believe it may have been, yes.
I don't have any further questions for
Thank you.
Mr. Stewart.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any additional witnesses, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yeah, Mr. Fernandez.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fernandez, you present? Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez,
Yes.
who's Wayne Miller?
Wayne Miller
Objection.
is,
Objection.
Yeah, do you have a title for this person, Mrs. Zummalong? I'm not sure. That name has not come up before now.
I'll withdraw the question.
Okay, thank you.
You know who he is though, right?
Mrs. Zummalong, you withdrew the person. Let's move on.
Mr. Fernandez, you heard your inspector's testimony, correct?
yes.
You agree with it?
I think that he could have been more clear about some things, but overall, I think that, yes, he was accurate.
Okay. And in or about January 2021, do you remember giving a PowerPoint presentation to the public?
Yes.
And that PowerPoint presentation regarded your office's interpretation of Chapter 9-2500.
It was a reminder / explanation of the fire suppression contracting requirements in the city of Philadelphia.
And that PowerPoint presentation, that PowerPoint presentation took place in January 2021.
I believe it was on January 26th, 2021.
And during that presentation, you stated that your office was going to interpret Chapter 9-2500 to mean that certificate holders needed to be on site to be supervising apprentices.
In my recollection, I stated that that's what the requirement was. I don't think I would have said anything about we are interpreting now or anything like that, which I think your question kind of suggested.
And has your office ever issued any regulations?
No AIU specific regulations, although we're involved in a number of discussions around general regulations.
Okay. Are you aware of any regulations that expressly state supervision of apprentice workers must be by on-site certificate holders?
I don't believe there's any regulation regarding that.
And when did you become the head of AIU?
September 2019.
And what were you doing before that?
I was at the City of Philadelphia Law Department.
And so you don't know what your office's interpretation of 9-2500 was before September 2019?
I would say that I think I do know, because I searched our records and inquired. And so, yeah, I would dispute that. I would say I do know.
Who'd you inquire with?
I reviewed all of our old code bulletins, all of our regulations. I'm sure I spoke with some of the supervisors or managers in the construction inspections unit. At least that would be a starting point.
Okay, now you already testified that you're not aware of any regulations that require on-site supervision, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware of any code bulletins that
No,
require on-site supervision?
no.
Okay. Did the supervisors that you spoke with tell you that prior to your time at AIU, the code was interpreted to have to mean on-site supervision?
Nobody gave me any indication that there had ever been any sort of determination that on-site supervision was not required, and everyone was in agreement that the code as written required on-site supervision.
Okay. Which supervisors told you that?
I don't know if a supervisor told me that fact directly. I likely would have spoken with, at the time, Manager John Leck, at the time, Deputy Commissioner Ralph DiPietro, and others. But again, I don't have specific recollection of each conversation.
Mr. Fernandez, am I correct that you have no firsthand knowledge about how the department interpreted 9-2500 before September 2019?
I will agree with firsthand knowledge being highlighted, because I wasn't at the department before then making operational decisions.
But in January 2021, well, first off, who was your presentation, this PowerPoint presentation that we've been talking about given to?
It was open to the public, but we marketed it for all fire suppression companies, license holders. I think we sent out a blast email to any email on file with a fire suppression contractor license. So yeah.
And in that meeting where you gave the PowerPoint, you made clear that your office interpreted Chapter 9-2500 to mean on-site supervision.
Yes.
Okay. And that presentation was given after the code violation was issued at Master Street.
Correct.
And it was given after the code violation was issued for North 19th Street.
Correct.
And it was given probably about 2 days before the code violation at 1721 Ridge, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Sitting here today, how frequently do you give these public presentations of the kind that you did in January?
Do you mean specifically fire suppression contracting webinars?
Yes.
Probably given like 3 or 4 total. Maybe 3, I would say.
3 or 4 total since September 2019?
Yes,
Okay. Prior to January 2021, how many did you give?
none.
No. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you. Any cross, Ms. Curley?
Just very briefly on that. Director Fernandez, appellant's counsel used the word interpretation a lot when describing how the department is applying 9/2500. Was there ever, did you have any understanding that of supervision, the definition of supervision changing from your time taking over AIU to your time prior to AIU?
No, it's always been the same.
And what is AIU's understanding of how supervision is applied in the code?
Supervision as applied in the code.
Specifically
requires-
for fire suppression.
Well, for fire suppression or for plumbers, it requires on-site supervision.
Okay, and there's no regulation, bulletin, any written documentation that has any different definition of that available.
Correct.
And that recitation of the code that was provided at the aqueduct at the presentation that you gave to fire suppression professionals, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay. You at that presentation that you gave for fire suppression professionals, you articulated the requirements of the code.
Yes, I was stating the requirements of the code that had existed at the very least, I can say with firsthand knowledge since September 2019, and based on information and belief well before then, I was just reiterating those in this forum. I think, again, I haven't looked at it in some time, but I think I even specifically say in there, these are the code requirements. These are, I think I specified, these have been the code requirements. These will continue to be the code requirements.
To your recollection, at any point in terms of the definition of supervision, did you indicate that the definition had changed or was different at any point?
I would not have done that because I have never believed that to be the case.
Okay, and it's your belief today that the definition of supervision has been and continues to be, as you described it, on-site supervision?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And the last thing is, you heard that Mr. Zimmelung asked you if you had heard the testimony provided by Inspector Wendell, and you had mentioned you agreed with it, but you thought he could have been more clear. Is there something for the board you wish to clarify?
Yeah, I thought Inspector Stewart's testimony, again, I think all objectively accurate. There was one part that perhaps could have been more specific. I think the way the question was phrased, it sounded like he said that I had provided instruction on a change in interpretation or something like that. And that is not the case. But in December of 2020, after learning that our inspectors were not, I guess, fresh on the 92500 requirements, I sat with them and explained what 92500 required, which includes that a certificate holder be on site supervising the apprentices and that everyone working on a system be an apprentice.
Okay. And it's your job as director of AIU to identify gaps in knowledge that your inspectors might have.
Absolutely, yes.
And when you identify those gaps, it's your job to fill those gaps.
Absolutely, yes. We have a duty to enforce the code as written, and we take that duty very seriously.
Okay. I have nothing further.
I have some
Yes.
brief follow-up questions.
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez, you said that in December, did I hear your testimony correctly, that in December 2020, you didn't believe the inspector's knowledge about what 92500 required was fresh?
Correct.
And Ms. Curley used the term gaps in knowledge. Did your inspectors have some gaps in knowledge as to what 92500 required in December 2020?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe it.
And their knowledge wasn't fresh because they weren't citing people for having apprentices on site without on-site supervision, correct?
That's correct. We had not received.
And
Excuse me, I must finish my answer. We hadn't received any complaints alleging uncertified workers or unsupervised workers, and so they had not had opportunity to perform any investigations of that allegation.
And then the gaps in knowledge existed because they weren't citing anybody for having apprentices on site with lack of supervision.
I think maybe it's the other way around, where due to the gaps in knowledge, perhaps they had not cited anyone.
Did any of those complaints come from Wayne Miller?
Objection.
There's an objection. Ms. Curley, what is the basis of the objection?
It's not relevant to this proceeding where these complaints came from.
Yeah, that name has popped up before, Mrs. Zummalong, and you withdrew the question. What is the?
So Mr. Miller works with Mr. Fernandez. Mr. Miller is the head of the unionized
I'm gonna
sprinkler
object.
fitter firms.
Okay, I want to
And
know.
Mr.
Okay, I'm sorry. You said Mr. Miller worked with Mr. Fernandez. Was he an employee of LNI? Is that what you're saying?
No, that is incorrect.
But I'm asking
And
Mrs. Zummalong. No, Ms. Curley. Mrs. Zummalong. Are you suggesting that he was an employee of LNI?
It's my understanding that Mr. Miller's on the Board of Building Standards, so he is an employee of LNI.
No. Okay. Board of Building Standards members are not employed. No, mind. I won't get into that technicality, but okay. I'd asked, Ms. Curley posed an objection. She posed an objection, and I will sustain her objection. Okay. Thank you.
I don't have anything further at this time for Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you very much. Do you have any further witnesses, Mrs. Zummalong?
I do not have any further witnesses. And Mr. Ramos.
Pardon me? Is that someone you want to call?
Inspector Ramos.
Is that someone you'd like to call presently?
Yes.
Okay.
I noticed his attendance.
Okay. I don't believe Mr. Ramos was present.
No, he's here.
Was he here when we swore everyone in?
He was, Chair.
Okay. All right, Mr. Ramos, would you unmute your screen so that you may be questioned? Thank you. Please proceed, sir.
Yes. I just need to locate Mr. Ramos so I can see him. Good afternoon, Mr. Ramos. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Have you been present for this whole hearing so far?
Yes.
And you've listened to the witnesses, testimony of all the witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you been an inspector with the Department of License and Inspection?
8 years.
Okay. How long have you been with the AIU division?
2 years roughly.
Okay. So if I bring that back, that would have been about October 2020?
Somewhere around there.
Okay. And between October 2020 and January 2021, did you inspect construction sites?
Yes.
Did you inspect construction sites where fire suppression firms are working?
Yes.
Can you tell us of any specific instances where you issued a citation to a sprinkler fitter firm like my client for having licensed apprentices on site without having a certificate holder also on site?
No, I can't recall at this time.
Okay. At some point, well, first off, when you started working for AIU, was it your understanding that was it your understanding of the code that licensed apprentices of fire suppression firms could work on site without a certificate holder physically being present?
No.
Do the inspectors in your office have periodic meetings to go over the various codes that you're required to enforce?
Yes.
How frequently?
Once a week.
Okay. And was that the case in October through January 2021? I'm sorry, October 2020 to January 2021?
Roughly.
And you participated in those meetings?
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez participated in those meetings?
Yes.
Mr. Stewart participated in those meetings?
Yes.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Ramos.
Thank you. Any cross, Ms. Curley?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Zimmerlong, is that accurate that that was your last witness on these cases?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. What I am going to suggest is that we do our closing arguments for wrap the whole thing up. But before we move on to this next matter, and I'd ask Mr. Wade to read that in, it's number 8. Before we do that, a Jefferson Street address has been referenced by both council, but I don't see it on our listing for today.
That matter was not appealed, board.
Okay, but it had similar facts as the appealed matters.
Yes, and it applies to the notice of intent to suspend, but because of the nature of the testimony and getting the inspectors in, and I can recall the inspector, but it pertains to that.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear. That wait. You can speak in a moment, Mrs. Zimmerlin. What I'm asking, because I didn't see it on my list here, and it kept coming up. I just wanted to understand. That's all. Mrs. Zimmerlin?
Just as a point of clarity, and maybe I heard Ms. Curley incorrectly, which is the violation, there is a violation for 609 Jefferson Street, but that matter has been appealed. It might not be on the list before the board now, but it was appealed.
I was not aware of that, but
all right.
Yeah, it was appealed on May 10th, 2021. You're not aware of it, just like you weren't aware of all the other stuff when you made the allegation that
Mrs. Zimmerlin, I will insist that everyone be respectful of one another in this matter. Understand? If you want to proceed, that's how we're going to proceed.
This is an important matter
It's
for my
very
client,
important.
Your Honor.
Sir, it's very important, and your respectful and decorum is just as important. And that I'm not going to have it. So let's read in number 8, please.
Case number 8, hearing appeal number 2022-003-230. Aqueduct Fire Protection.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Curley, do you have a set of witnesses that are different from those that have been sworn?
no.
Okay, so please proceed.
The department's witness will be Director Fernandez.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fernandez, just to remind you, you're still under oath.
Thank you.
Okay, and if council will agree, I'll just incorporate the testimony as to Inspector or Director Fernandez's experience with AIU, his background, and his employer.
Mrs. Zimmerlin, you have a response? You muted.
She's got to put on her case.
Okay, that's fine. Director Fernandez, who is your employer?
Department of Licenses and Inspections.
Okay, and what is your position with the department?
I'm the Director of Audits and Investigations.
Can you briefly for the board explain what AIU does?
I'd be happy to. We are responsible for enforcing license requirements for contractors and other trade licensees relevant to today's proceeding that is inclusive of fire suppression contractors.
Okay, and what specifically is your role as director of AIU?
I am essentially responsible for day-to-day operations of the unit. I run the unit pretty much.
Okay. And the testimony that's been previously provided as to these matters as to the violations at 809 North 19th Street, 2421 North Masher Street, 1721 Ridge Street, and 609 Jefferson Street. Are you familiar with the investigations that AIU conducted at those job sites?
I am, yes.
Okay. And the violations that were presented to the board, you reviewed all of those investigations?
I did, yes.
And do you concur that do you agree that those violations were properly issued against Aqueduct?
I do, with the exception that has already been addressed today, wherein we were unaware that Matthew McKenzie did have an apprentice permit. And so we cited him with a violation for working without any permit, apprentice permit or certification, when in fact he should have been cited for working as an apprentice without the required supervision.
Got it. So as to Mr. McKenzie specifically, that was incorrectly cited.
Yes, on the violation notice that was issued to Mr. McKenzie, that was incorrect.
As to Aqueduct, his employer, the correct code violation was cited.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And after these January 2021 investigations, what action did you take as director of AIU?
Well, after the 3 January site investigations, I was aware that we had performed a total of 3 site investigations at active aqueduct fire suppression sites and had found all 3 of those sites in violation. And we had a recurring pattern where the required supervision wasn't being provided. And so I made the decision to open up a license investigation into aqueduct fire protection systems. And on January 22nd, I sent a notice of investigation and request for information to that company.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
I can see.
Yes.
Okay, and do you identify, do you recognize rather the exhibit that's marked as government exhibit F?
I do.
Okay, and is this the notice of investigation you referenced?
Yes, it is.
This was sent on January 22nd, 2021,
That is correct.
and it was addressed to Aqueduct, correct?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of this notice of investigation?
Well, the fact that we had, basically done 3 for 3 finding violations at the sites gave me concerns that the company may be regularly violating the code in their business practices. And so to investigate that, I requested essentially a roster, a list of Aqueduct employees, and along with that list, a description of what work each employee performs, whether they perform fire suppression work as defined by 925.013, as you can see there, and then a list of the certifications held by each employee.
Okay. And I'm going to move to the last page. I'm sorry. Strike that. Did you receive any response to this investigation request from Aqueduct?
I did. I think first I granted an extension on the response, which is fairly typical. And then I received a response from Mr. Zimmelong, essentially saying that his client would not be cooperating with the department in any way.
Okay. And did you receive anything additional, any information that was responsive to any of the inquiries that you requested about?
No, just a strong refusal to cooperate with the investigation.
Okay. And so at that time, so from the time from January to April 2021, did Aqueduct's failure to respond to this investigation request constitute a violation of the Philadelphia Code?
No.
Okay. And did any point, did AIU cite Aqueduct for a violation of the Philadelphia Code based on their failure to respond to this inquiry?
No.
Okay. After you sent this notice, after no response from Aqueduct, what happened next? What did AIU do next?
Well, on February 8th, we issued a warning letter to Aqueduct.
Okay, so I'm going to move to Exhibit G. Is this the warning letter you're referencing?
It is, yes.
Okay, and that's dated February 8th, 2021, directed to Aqueduct?
That is correct.
Okay, and what was the purpose of sending this document?
The purpose of sending this document was to attempt to deter behavior in violation of the Philadelphia Code. It essentially says, in the last month, we visited 3 of your sites where work was active. We found each of those sites in violation. I think we have a brief restatement of the applicable requirements, and then a warning that they must operate in compliance with the Philadelphia Code, or upon finding another violation, we will suspend their license.
Okay, and that warning of suspension, is that referenced in the last 2 paragraphs? It's the last paragraph on the first page into the last paragraph on the second page.
Yes, it is.
And it states, please let this letter serve as a warning. Fire suppression work occurring under permits issued to your license may only be performed by fire suppression certificate holders or by fire suppression apprentice permit holders under the supervision of an on-site fire suppression certificate holder. See section 9-1005 6A and section 9-25-054. Further violation of the code requirements set forth by 9-1005 and 9-2500 shall result in the suspension or revocation of your fire suppression contractor license. Did I read that correctly?
You did, yes.
Okay. After you sent this notice, what happened next?
Well, I think the next thing that happens is roundabout mid-April, I think it might have been April 15th. Our inspectors found another active aqueduct site in violation of the Philadelphia Code. If I recall correctly, another situation where an apprentice was working without supervision.
Okay. Do you believe that property was 609 Jefferson?
That's correct.
Okay. And once that violation was found, what did AIU do?
At that point, we issued a notice of intent to suspend the contractor license for a period of 6 months.
Okay, and I'm showing you, apologies, Exhibit I. Do you recognize that document?
I do, yes,
And is this the notice of intent to suspend you were referencing?
it is.
Dated April 23rd, 2021 and directed to Aqueduct.
Correct.
Okay. And what does this document, explain to the board what this document notified Aqueduct of?
It notified them that we intended to suspend Aqueduct's license for a period of 6 months. It would go into effect, the suspension, after 30 days if no appeal were taken. If an appeal is taken, then we wait until the board hearing.
Okay. And an appeal was taken, you were notified that an appeal was taken for this notice of intent to suspend, and the license has not been suspended.
That's correct.
Okay. And why is suspension of Aqueduct's fire suppression contractor license warranted here?
Well, it's warranted because 92500 requires suspension for violations of that section. Perhaps I would also say that we had found violations in nearly every single site investigation we had performed for Aqueduct. We had given them a warning as to this specific behavior. We had a good indication that this was a regular pattern of conduct, and we had no indication that there was any sign it was going to abate. And so to enforce the license requirements and enforce 92500 and 91005, we determined it was appropriate to suspend the license for a 6-month period.
Okay. And this notice of intent to suspend, this cites all of the violations that AIU had discovered, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And recites the department's attempt to gain additional information into the business practices of Aqueduct.
That's correct.
Okay. And there are 4 properties cited in this notice of intent to suspend. Is that consistent with other suspension actions that AIU has issued in other cases?
Yes, I would say it's extremely typical to issue a suspension for violations, repeated violations across 4 job sites. In fact, we've issued suspensions for behavior at a single job site in instances in the past. There's nothing unusual about a violation recurring at 4 different sites and that resulting in a suspension.
Okay. And at this case, is it still your position as director of AIU that a suspension is warranted for Aqueduct's license?
Yes.
Okay. For all the reasons you articulated.
Correct.
Okay. I do not have anything further for Director Fernandez. Just ask for the admission of exhibits F, G, and I.
So a minute. Mr. Zimmerman, do you have any cross? You're muted. Sir, you're
Mr.
muted.
Fernandez, did I hear your testimony correctly that you sent Aqueduct a letter requesting, I believe it was additional information. I believe the date of that letter was January 23rd. January 23rd or 22nd?
22nd, yeah, correct. 22nd.
January 22nd, you sent a letter to Aqueduct demanding additional information, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I think your counsel showed you a copy of that letter, correct?
Yes, I believe she shared her screen.
Okay, and your office, you have access to the records of all violations ever issued against the contractor, correct?
Well, I created the license violation scheme where contractors are cited directly with violations of the Title IX license violations. That started in January 2020. So there isn't like a lengthy backwards record. On occasion, when construction inspectors or building inspectors, they're often referred to, when they issue Title IV violations to the property that do not, allege any individual wrongdoing to the people cited with those violations, they will occasionally add contractors as second responsible parties. But those are not actually, that's a different thing entirely. So there you
All
go.
right. Let me put a finer point on it. Sitting here today, if you wanted to, could you look up the license number for a contractor, for example, the license number for my client, Aqueduct Fire Protection, and pull up a history of violations issued by your office against Aqueduct back to a certain period of time?
Back to January 2020.
Okay, and could you do that in January of 2021?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so you, when you wrote your letter on January 22nd, 2021, you had access to a database that could have told you, at least back a year, what Aqueduct Fire Protection violation history was.
Yes.
Okay, and you stated that you believe that on January 22nd, 2021, the reason that you issued that letter to my client was because you believe they were regularly violating the code. Did I hear your testimony correctly?
Yes.
And did you do a search of your database to determine how many violations Aqueduct had back to January 2020 when you wrote the letter?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, they hadn't been cited before the Masher Street citation, January 7th.
So when you wrote your letter on January 22nd, 2021, because you believe they were regularly violating the code, the only violation that existed in your records was Masher Street. One violation, correct?
No, we had cited violations at 808 North 19th Street and at Masher Street before we issued the notice of investigation.
So 3 violations involving 2 properties, correct?
Yeah, two sets of violations at 2 properties.
And you heard Mr. Reeves' testimony, right?
Yes.
And he told you how he's been performing work in the city of Philadelphia for 8 years, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And based upon these 3 violations issued over the course of only a few weeks, you concluded that my client, who had been performing work in the city of Philadelphia for 8 years, regularly violated the code.
Well, also playing into my
question is.
I need to answer your question.
No, I'll rephrase the question. I withdraw.
No, I want to answer the question you asked.
I withdraw.
You let me start answering, so I'd like to finish.
Mr. Fernandez.
Go ahead.
On January 22nd, 2021, you sent a letter to my client because you believe they were regularly violating the code. And that was based upon 3 violations issued over the course of several weeks.
No, I said that the warning letter I issued in February was based on that belief. The notice of investigation, I did not testify that I sent the notice of investigation based on that belief.
Okay. And your warning letter, between the date of your warning letter, between January 22nd and the date of your warning letter, were there additional violations issued?
Yes.
Which violations?
The one that was issued on January 28th at 1721 Ridge.
Okay, so that's a 3rd property.
And actually that inspection was on January 25th.
Okay.
So I believe the warning letter was issued the day after that site investigation was performed, establishing the 3rd violation.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. Your position when you wrote your warning letter that they were regularly violating the code was based solely on the violations they had received in January 2021?
No.
Are you aware of any violations that were issued by your office before January 2021?
No.
Then what other violations were they based on?
They were based on the fact that I had observed, I had looked in our system and seen that Aqueduct had obtained over 400 permits in the year 2020. And based on an email you sent to the law department where you conveyed that your client only had 2 certified workers on staff.
Now, let's talk about your notice of investigation letter. But that, by the way, the email that I sent, that hasn't been introduced as evidence, has it?
No, but you asked me a question that required me to talk about it.
Well, I moved to strike it. I moved to strike it. It was hearsay.
Well, hearsay is permitted under certain circumstances. That's fine.
Okay. Now, when you sent your notice of investigation, you received a response to me, correct? From me, correct?
Yes.
And what was your testimony? Why don't you summarize what you believe that response said?
It basically was a denial of any cooperation. It said things like the department has no home rule authority to investigate my client, and there's Fifth Amendment implications and other things of that nature. I haven't read it before this hearing because I know it wasn't part of our evidence packet.
So this is a, I'm going to show you, this is a copy of the letter, correct?
It looks like it to me so far.
Right. And the reason I gave you several reasons, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
guess
I recall 2 specifically, and I'll take your representation that there are others in there, sure.
I'm just going to object at this point. Can I get an offer? Why is this? What is the relevance of this letter at this? As this?
Cross-examination as to the credibility of the witness's testimony. He testified what the letter said. We're going to walk through the letter and see if it comports with his testimony on direct examination.
Okay. Objection overruled. Please proceed.
And Mr. Fernandez, one of the reasons I gave was that your department could already determine who my client's certificate holders and apprentices were, couldn't they?
Well, that's what your letter said. It's not actually true, but that is what your letter says.
This is why I'm objecting to the relevance of this document, because this is a letter from counsel to Director Fernandez. I don't know how he can testify as to what counsel said to Mr. Fernandez. These are counsel's assertions and statements of law to Director Fernandez.
And Mr. Fernandez stated what the letter says, and we're cross-examining him to determine whether or not his testimony as to what the letter says is consistent with what it actually says. This is classic cross-examination. The objection's already been overruled once.
Yeah, I've ruled on that matter, Ms. Curley, so we're going to proceed.
It's going to continue. I'll renew it as we go.
Okay.
And another reason I gave was that your office lacks the power to investigate and issue general subpoenas, didn't I?
Like, didn't I say that one?
Okay. I believe you said, well, you said it now. I just want to be clear. And also the letter raised concerns about Fifth Amendment violations, correct?
Yes, I think that's the second one I referenced.
Right? And I had concerns about that, correct?
I mean, you state them in the letter.
Right. And I asked you that I concluded it. Stated I'd be happy to discuss any questions you had regarding the letter, correct?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I conclude my letter by stating that I'd be happy to discuss any questions you had regarding the issues that I raised in that letter.
You do, yes.
And you never contacted me to discuss my letter.
No, I did not.
I move for the admission of my letter dated February 3rd to Mr. Fernandez.
Okay, so noted.
Okay. Mr. Fernandez, bear with me. I have a few more questions. Mr. Fernandez, can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay. This is a letter from my office to the Board of License and Inspection Review, and there's a stamp here. Do you recognize that stamp there?
I've seen that stamp many times.
Okay, what does that stamp indicate?
That means that the document was, I guess, went through intake with Board of L&I Review Administration.
Okay, so the Board of LI Renew stamps when something comes in.
Yes.
Okay, and if you look down here, it states, I state in my letter, I represent the appellant, Aqueduct Fire Protection LLC. Enclosed, please find notices of appeal for the filing violations. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then I list a number of violations, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and one of the violations is the violation for 609 Jefferson Street, correct?
So 609 Jefferson Street is 28245. Can you scroll up, please?
Sure. You want to keep going up?
Yes, up to the prior page where it lists the, yeah, so it looks like, yeah, you do list that.
Okay, and it looks like the date of the violation was April 16th, correct?
Correct.
And it was received by the Board of Review on the 11th, correct?
That's what the stamp reflects, yes.
Right, that means it was received within less than 30 days, correct?
Yeah, it's less than 30 days.
I just want to be clear. Is it your position that that the 609 Jefferson, it's your counsel's position, but I want to make sure it's your position as the person that has to take the position. Is your position that the 609 Jefferson Street violation was not timely appealed?
I don't think I do need to take that position. I think that would be for the Board of L&I Review and their administration to determine. I will say I was not aware of any appeal of 609 Jefferson Street before you showed me your screen here.
No, but looking at this document, it would indicate to you that it was timely appealed.
Yes, this document indicates to me that it appears from the stamp and the documentation as represented to me that an appeal was taken.
And if you look, I think.
And I can just speed this up. I will stipulate if counsel is asserting that he filed this appeal timely and is now providing that documentation with a stamp from the board. This is the first time I am seeing it. I received this information from the board. So, and it is not on today's list. So I had no information as to this appeal. If he's saying it's appealed, I am taking him at his word, and I am not contesting that it is appealed or untimely.
Ms. Curley, you made the assertion it wasn't appealed timely, and then you laughed about it.
This is
When I
the
tried
first
to-
time
Yeah, well,
I have
before you
seen
make
that.
it, let me give you some advice.
Mr. Zimmerlong, Mr. Zimmerlong, Mr. Zimmerlong, this is Mr. Zimmerlong, Mr. Zimmerlong, Mr. Zimmerlong. This is not your role to give advice to anyone other than your client in this hearing. This is the hearing that I chaired, not you. And so what we want to do is proceed to, if we have any additional witnesses from either of you. Do you have
Well, I'm
anything?
still I don't believe I'm finished with Mr. Fernandez.
Okay, please proceed then.
And the second page also indicates that this licensing violation notice, that this is the violation itself for 609 Jefferson Street, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Fernandez, you heard Mr. Ramos's testimony?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it accurate that he would hold weekly meetings, or you would chair weekly meetings to discuss code interpretation?
Yeah, we currently have weekly meetings Wednesday mornings with the inspectors, the inspection supervisor, manager, and myself. Back in January or early 2021, I'm not sure if those were happening on a weekly basis, but yeah, that is our current kind of plan.
But at least in some form throughout 2020, you would have regular meetings with your inspectors.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the purpose of those meetings was to make sure everybody knew how to interpret the code.
It was to cover anything relevant to our site investigation program, which would include that if necessary.
Okay, no further questions for Mr. Fernandez.
Okay, thank you. Any additional witnesses, Mr. Zimmerlo?
No, sir.
Okay. Ms. Curley, do you have any additional witnesses?
No.
Okay, well then what I'd like you to do then is to both of you to prepare to go to closing arguments. And what we will do is hear your bifurcated closing arguments, if that can't be simple enough, is that if it would contain your closing comments regarding numbers 1, 2, 5, 6, and then proceed on to close on offer your comments on number 8. Okay, and Mr. Zimmerlong, I'd prefer if you would start and have Ms. Curley complete.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And thank you, as I think the board can recognize, this is by my passion at times that sometimes I get excited, but you need to understand this is a matter, and I hope you understand, this is a matter of grave importance to my client. This is a matter where we're talking about whether or not Aqueduct Fire Protection can continue operating, whether it's going to have to tell its employees they have to go find work somewhere else. So it is something that is important to me and I'm passionate about. And I just want to emphasize that to the board, that my vigor and zeal in representing my client, that's what undergirds all of this. So I apologize if my passion annoyed anybody. But panel, I think we need to start with a very basic question as to what Chapter 9, 25054 requires. And if we look at the text of the statute, nowhere, either in Chapter 9, 2505, or as Mr. Fernandez admits, anywhere else in the code is on-site supervision required. The only thing the code says is that a licensed apprentice holder has to be supervised. So we must look at the text of the statute and determine when the text of the statute is clear and unambiguous, we must give those terms plain meaning. The term supervise is very plain and clear. It means to oversee. That's the dictionary definition of supervise. It means to be in charge of. And I even asked a question, I think it was of Mr. Stewart. I said, you have a supervisor. Does he attend every on-site inspection with you? Of course not. And I used the example in my papers. Lawyers supervise junior lawyers. We don't hover over them while they're performing work. Someone that supervises a warehouse is not staring over employees as they do their assembly line work. A supervisor in an office doesn't go over and make sure every single person at every single minute is doing what they're supposed to do. In fact, supervisors often aren't even physically present in the office, just like supervisors aren't physically present. Mr. Stewart's supervisor is not physically present. The plain meaning of supervision is that they do just what Mr. Reeves said they do now, said they did back in January 2021, said they did before that time. They make sure that the people are doing things the right way. They visit the projects, they go see the projects, they have weekly meetings, they're there sometimes daily, sometimes more, at least several times a week. When their apprentices have questions, they're there to answer them, they have FaceTime. Clearly, they were supervising. I don't think there's any question that they were supervising their employees and have always supervised their employees. The question for this board is whether or not the code requires on-site supervision. And by the plain language of the code, the word supervision cannot be said to mean on-site supervision. There's another reason why on-site supervision cannot supervision does not mean on-site supervision is because Pennsylvania law is very clear. You cannot read into the statute words that do not exist. Clearly, as Mr. Fernandez has admitted, the words do not exist. They don't exist in the code. They don't exist in a bulletin. They don't exist in a regulation. They don't now, and they never have. Okay? Finally, to the extent that the board does not believe the code is clear on the term supervision, and if we apply the normal rules, the rules that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has said we need to use to interpret statutes, we look at the plain meaning, we simply go to the dictionary, it's abundantly clear. It's a common sense definition. Even if the board is not convinced of that, then the term is ambiguous. Why is it ambiguous? Because Aqueduct's interpretation of the code is reasonable, and it could be said that the city's interpretation of the code is reasonable. You heard Aqueduct. They did work like this for many years. You heard Mr. Fernandez. His own employees, his inspectors weren't fresh. There was gaps in knowledge. They weren't clear on what the code required. So you have an ambiguity potentially. So then the board has to resolve that ambiguity. First, and there's rules for resolving ambiguities. First, we need to look at the purpose of the code. The purpose of the code is to make sure employees that are working on fire suppression and sprinkler systems are at least enrolled in an apprentice program. There's no question that happens here. City Council wanted these employees to be trained, and they wanted them to be supervised at someone that had matriculated past the training. That happened. That happened. There's no question that Aqueduct's employees were all, you heard the question here was not whether or not they had the licenses, it's whether or not they were being supervised. So supervision, as City Council intended, never meant to be, never was intended to be on site. To also resolve ambiguity, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has said you can look at similar statutes and how they've been interpreted. And here, and this is why I asked the question about it, and I think Mr. Woodson recognized where I was going with my questioning. This is why I use the example of the Philadelphia Plumbing Code. Because the Philadelphia Plumbing Code is very similar to the fire code. What the Philadelphia Plumbing Code says, and this appears at Title IX, Section 9-1003. I think it's Code Section P-103 in the Plumbing Code. It states, quote, "No person shall install plumbing, water, drain, or fixtures unless properly licensed pursuant to the code," just like here, right? Chapter 9-1003 permits apprentices, plumbing apprentices, to perform plumbing work, quote, "under the direction of a licensed plumber." Why that's important is direction and supervision are very similar terms. But you heard Mr. Stewart testify that the Department of License and Inspection does not take the position that the licensed plumber needs to be physically on site with an apprentice plumber in order to comply with the code. So there's an inconsistency there. But if you look about how, when we're resolving this ambiguity, if we look to see how the department interprets other sections of the code, their interpretation of the plumbing code militates in favor of resolving the ambiguity in favor of what Aqueduct believed it to be in January through April 2021. The Philadelphia Electric Code, obviously properly done electrical work is of utmost safety. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Number of life safety issues involved with electricity and electrical work and projects. Requires that work to be done by a firm that has a license, has an electrical license. However, the code itself places no restrictions on who can physically perform that work. And we heard no testimony from anybody that the Department of License and Inspection requires the license holder to be physically on site with the apprentices or anyone else when they're doing that. However, the board would have this board read Chapter 9-2500 specially, differently, and uniquely. That should not be allowed. We can also look for the federal law to resolve any ambiguity. And again, we don't concede an ambiguity exists, but clearly one, if the court's going to accept this interpretation by the board, there is one. Federal law does not require apprentices to have full-time on-site supervision. It just says they need to have adequate supervision while matriculating through the program. So if we just look at the straight violation of the code, then there should be a ruling in favor of Aqueduct. The other reason why the code violations, this appeal should be sustained and these code violations should be dismissed, is that the department is stopped from changing its enforcement practices. The doctrine of estoppel prevents a party from acting differently than the manner in which it induced another party to expect. And I was just quoting from a decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Novelty Knitting Mills versus Siskine from 1983. That doctrine has been applied against the government. That so was held by Quinn versus Commonwealth Department of State, Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs in 1984. The department is stopped, therefore, from interpreting the code differently, making a U-turn and issuing violations starting in 2021. You heard Mr. Stewart testify, you heard Mr. Ramos testify, and you heard Mr. Fernandez testify. Their testimony was consistent. They could not identify a specific instance of a fire sprinkler contractor receiving a violation for having apprentices on site without adequate supervision. There's a reason for that. That was not what the department was interpreting the code to mean prior to Mr. Fernandez changing the interpretation in January 2021. You heard Mr. Fernandez testify. He's a lawyer. He was very careful with his words. There was gaps in knowledge. His employees weren't fresh. His inspectors weren't fresh. They weren't fresh because nobody was telling them that the code should be interpreted in a manner which required on-site supervision. Mr. Fernandez met weekly or at least regularly with his employees to discuss, among other things, how the code should be interpreted. Mr. Fernandez has been the head of AIU since September 2019. You heard Mr. Ramos testify that while he's been there, that's been occurring. Mr. Fernandez didn't dispute these regular meetings. So for over a year, before he decides to change the interpretation and try to stick it to my client, try to put my client out of business, try to revoke its license, he doesn't say a word to his employees. Not one single thing is done against a sprinkler fitter contractor. Mr. Reeves testified to that. He's been doing business in the city of Philadelphia for 8 years. Never received a violation. The reason is the code was interpreted differently until Mr. Fernandez tried to change it. He didn't do it by regulation. He didn't do it by bulletin. He did it by decree. And that's not allowed. In fact, he did it by decree after my client was cited for at least 2 of the violations. The board could certainly take that position now if it so chooses and escape estoppel, but it cannot escape the estoppel argument as it was in January 2021. It's clear. Try as he may, it's clear. He could call it knowledge gaps. He could call it lack of freshness. What it was a different interpretation, and that was changed. In fact, what I also think is telling about Mr. Fernandez's testimony was he never gave a public meeting to any fire sprinkler contractors before that. He did for other contractors, but he did not. It would be patently unfair for my client, who relied for years on the previous interpretation, to be stuck with these violations. And not just stuck with these violations, if Mr. Fernandez and Ms. Curley get her way, put out of business, license revoked, lay off their employees. That's not what the law permits. This is an issue of fundamental fairness as much as it is a question of law and what the code requires. So as to these violations, I first tell the board to look to the code. Use your common sense. Use the common understanding of what supervision is. All of you at one point or another have supervised somebody in your life, and think about it. When you were supervising employees, lawyers, or anyone else, could be your own children. I like to think I'm a good parent. I supervise my children, I promise you. Do I know what they're doing every single second of the day? Absolutely not. But I don't think anybody would say I'm going to give my children out of supervision. And I doubt any of you would be accused of that either. Use common sense. Supervision does not mean on-site supervision. You cannot, as the Supreme Court says, read words into that statute that do not exist. Supervision means what Mr. Reeves said. Supervision is what Mr. Reeves and Aqueduct did for these apprentices. Even if you don't believe it's clear, I don't think the board can doubt that both parties' interpretations are reasonable. And if that's the case, then we have an ambiguity, and the board needs to resolve that ambiguity using the guidelines that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court says we should. And when we go down that list, I think one of the strongest factors is how the AIU, how the department interprets similar sections of the code, in particular plumbing. And finally, estoppel, fundamental fairness. Hearing what you heard today, do you think Aqueduct has been treated fairly? The question should be no. They have not been treated fairly. Mr. Fernandez wrote a letter. He called them he believed they were regularly violating the code for 3 violations. Forget about a clear record, at least back to January 2020. Nope. They were regularly violating the code. He was invited to discuss his investigation letter with me. Did he take up that chance? No, he didn't.
Mr. Zimmerlong,
Because he had an agenda.
I thought you were concluding your comments. At least you said you were.
I am going to conclude. He had an agenda. That agenda put my client out of business. That's what he wants. That's what this board should not allow. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Curley, you're now muted.
Yes, I'll be brief. Board, as to both matters, which I believe we're hearing. So for the first 4 appeals, there was uncontroverted testimony as to the underlying facts of this case. At 2421 North Masher, workers were discovered without apprentice workers were discovered without supervision. That was verified, that was testified to by the department, that was verified by Aqueduct's representative. At 808 North 19th Street, an apprentice, a worker was an apprentice, had an expired permit and also was working without supervision, and another individual was working without any license or any permit. And that was verified by both L&I and the Aqueduct's representative. At 1721 Ridge Avenue, there were two workers, apprentices working without supervision, and that was verified by the department and by Aqueduct's representative. And again, at 609 Jefferson Street, there was a worker, an apprentice worker working without supervision, and that was verified by the department and license and inspections. Supervision is given its absolute plain meaning. There's no interpretation of this word. It means exactly what everyone thinks supervision means, and what the dictionary does define it as is to watch a person or activity to make certain that everything is done correctly and safely. That's exactly what the code requires. That's exactly what the Department of License and Inspections implemented. There's been a lot of analogies to supervision for other fields, for lawyers, for plumbers. None of those fields involve installing fire suppression systems in the city of Philadelphia to ensure that those systems are installed correctly. So it comports with the obvious understanding and what we're talking about of a fire suppression system that needs to be installed safely with on-site supervision. So this is a clear word. There's no further interpretation needed. There's no ambiguity. And the department didn't even really interpret this word because it has and continues to understand supervision as everyone understands it. Even if the department did interpret this word, that interpretation is entitled to deference, and that is under the standard articulated in Turkey that has been referenced multiple times, as well as in the city's brief. Going to, even if there is some ambiguity, which there absolutely is not, the city has recited all the reasons in its brief and would just ask to incorporate that. The code and this application is entirely consistent with public safety. The department uses the word supervision consistently throughout the code to mean exactly what we think about on-site supervision to make sure jobs are done safely. The federal law that was referenced by appellant's counsel is just simply not accurate or relevant here. So I'll leave that to the briefs to make clear. And I would just add that every single one of these first four appeals has been verified today by the actions taken by Aqueduct. So from those violations, the department was completely correct in moving forward on the notice on the intention to suspend Aqueduct's license. These are repeated violations. There is a clear understanding by Aqueduct that what they were doing was incorrect, as evidenced by the letters, the multiple letters that Director Fernandez sent to Aqueduct, the presentations that they have presented, and the violations that Aqueduct had received. They continued after the warning letter, continued to have apprentices working without supervision. And Inspector Fernandez even testified that his understanding was there were hundreds of permits that Aqueduct was obtaining with very, very limited certified fire suppression workers being able to provide this on-site supervision that is obviously necessitated under the code. So based on that, his actions were completely correct in suspending this license to prevent this behavior from continuing and to apply the code as he is mandated to do under the Home Rule Charter and the Philadelphia Code. So with that, I would just ask to affirm all of the city's violations and their suspension notice to Aqueduct.
Hey, thank you very much for everyone's participation. The board will recess for a short executive session, and we will return and render a decision on this matter. All voting will be done in public on the record. So we will not make a decision prior to returning to the hearing. So I'm asking that Mr. Wade would give us an opportunity to be placed in the breakout room.
Yes.
Ms. Curley, we will be off the record until we return. I'm sorry, Ms. Staub, we will be off the record.
Did you make sure that the court reporter knew?
Yes, I think he meant me. He said
Okay,
Miss Staub, but I understood that. We're off the record.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Wade, the recording is still in progress, just so you know.
Yes, thank you.
So just give me the thumbs up. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Zimmerlong, just before we get, I just want to check to make sure that your clients are all present before we proceed.
They're present.
Okay, and Ms. Curley, I assume everyone of interest for you is present. Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for your participation and your patience in this matter. At this time, the vote will be called for each item. There will not be room or time for additional comment or argument by either side. This will be a vote of the board, and then of course you will be governed accordingly. Okay, thank you very much. So I will ask the board administrator to read each case. We will then vote on each one separately. Thank you. Mr. Wade,
Case number 1, hearing appeal number HA 2022-003-223, Aqueduct Fire Protection, 808 North 19th Street.
thank you very much. City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
Thank you. There's unanimous vote, city affirmed. Thank you very much. Let's read the next matter.
Case number 2, hearing appeal number HA 2022-003-224, Aqueduct Fire Protection, 808 North 19th Street.
Thank you very much. City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
Thank you very much. City affirmed. Next item.
Case number 5, hearing appeal number HA 2022-003-227, Aqueduct Fire Protection, 2421 North Masher Street.
City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
Thank you very much. Next matter.
Case number 6, hearing appeal number HA 2022-003-228, Aqueduct Fire Protection, 1721 Ridge Avenue.
City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
Thank you very much. Next item.
Case number 8, hearing appeal number HA 2022-003-230, Aqueduct Fire Protection, intent to suspend.
City affirmed.
City affirmed.
City affirm.
City
City
affirmed.
affirm. City affirm.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation. The vote has been recorded. We've asked the board to be available for a short executive session after this matter, this hearing is closed. That concludes our business for today. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
of course, this decision can be appealed, Mr. Zimmerlong, which I'm sure you're aware. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. So if you places any